Welcome back to What's New with Mead. We're in episode number 52, and I have Kevin Meintsma. Did I say that right, Kevin?
Yep.
All right.
Well done.
I did not ask you before, so I got a little nervous there that I totally butchered it. But I have Kevin Meintsma on the call today to chat about mead. Of course, this is a podcast all about mead making. And Kevin is a well-known mead maker in the world, also a well-known competition organizer, and just friendly face that you can always count on. And so we're glad to have him here. Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to be here.
So I want to start off. I don't necessarily, I feel like every podcast I've done or a lot of podcasts go, tell me how you got started. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. But I want to know just one basic thing, and that is, how long ago did you start making mead?
5 years.
Oh, really? Only 5 years?
Yep.
Man, and that's awesome, dude.
Well, I did have a bit of a head start or a leg up.
Uh-huh.
I started home brewing in about 1981. A year, I think, after it became legalized nationwide by Jimmy Carter.
Okay.
And so I got introduced by a friend I was working with, and he was doing extract batches in his apartment. I did a couple of things with him, and then I went off and started doing it on my own. I did extract batches for about 5 years, I think. And then my family reached a point where they were needing a lot more of my time and attention. So I actually stopped brewing altogether for 15 years. And then I picked it all up again in about 2008. And then I started doing all grain beer, I think in 2009 or 10. And that's when I got interested in doing competitions.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that changed a lot of things for me and for a whole bunch of different reasons. So I was doing all grain beer brewing, and still do, since about 2009 or 10, I suppose. So having that process down and doing competitions and being fairly good at it means that you've got a whole lot of the basic process things out of the way before you start in a different version of fermentation, whether it be cider, mead, or wine. Okay.
So tell me this, what was the biggest surprise for you switching from all grain beer and beers to mead? Is there something that you were like, oh my gosh, this is radically different? Or were you like, this is pretty parallel?
It's very parallel. I think the big surprise for me was how much less time and effort mead actually was compared to brewing beer.
Yeah.
Brewing beer is a huge investment of time up front. It's all cooking for however long your process takes, whether it's 6 hours or 12 hours, whatever it is. And you can't stop. You got to get that done, and you got to get it done right. And then you put it aside and wait for it to finish fermenting. And you're basically done with your beer at that point. Whereas mead, you can invest a small amount of time up front, but then it does need more frequent hands-on throughout the rest of the process, which is a very big difference between mead and beer. So for me, I think that was kind of the big surprise.
Yeah. Well, and the turnaround time for beer to mead is pretty wild too. I feel like that's a surprise for a lot of people.
Let's talk about that a little.
All right.
Because it isn't.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So a typical ale, if you know what you're doing, should take you about 3 weeks start to finish.
Now, when you say finish, are you drinking, or are you just mean fermentation?
Drinking.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at like a professional brewery, a good one, that's about their turn time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. 10 days in brewing and fermentation, and then another 4 or 5 days, and they're ready to serve, unless it's a lager, which is a different discussion.
Right.
The same is true for mead if you know what you're doing. So
now, would you say that's true for all percents, or are you talking specific ABVs? Like, because this is where it gets contentious. A lot of people will start to kind of fisticuff about like, well, if it's above 10, then they got a
Yeah. So higher ABV is going to take a little longer to ferment. That is fair. It shouldn't take a lot longer though.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually just recently started a braggot, which is not something I do very often because I'm not a huge fan of braggots, but I had some beer wort dropped in my lap, and it was a 1092 or 1090 beer wort. So it's already
Wow.
fairly big. And then
That's
I
big, yeah.
blasted it with a bunch of honey. So it jumped up to 1.148.
Oh man.
And so that's underway and it's already half done. And I just started it 4 days ago.
Are you using an ale yeast, or what are you using on that?
I started with USO5 and it immediately stalled. It did not like that high gravity.
Yep.
So I keep Uva Firm 43 on hand,
Hmm.
just in case, because that's kind of the how you fix a stall protocol. That's the suggestion. It's good for high gravity must and quite sturdy and has a wide temperature range. So I pitched that and then it just immediately went to town. So I
Okay.
expect that meat will probably be done fermenting in another week. So probably around 10 to 12 days total fermentation time.
What do you expect for that final gravity to be?
I'm hoping about 1045.
Hmm. Man. So is this a stout? It has to be. 1090 is too big for like a normal. I mean, I don't know.
It's an imperial amber ale.
Oh, okay, okay.
And so the honey that I put on there should complement that nicely.
Yeah.
And I just thought, normally I make my braggots kind of low ABV, low sugar, but
Mm-hmm.
I thought I wanted to just, since this was free wort, so there was a wort rally for Big Brew Day that
Okay.
my club did, and so that's how I ended up with this. So I thought,
Man.
well, this is something where I could just totally take a chance and not worry about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna see what happens.
So what kind of honey did you throw in that? I'm curious.
For that, let's see, what was it? I had a Minnesota wildflower, and this stuff must have come from southwestern Minnesota because it was fairly dark amber,
Mm.
and I think it had just a bit of eastern buckwheat mixed in it
Hmm.
because it had just a hint of that funkiness that you get from that particular honey. Not a lot, but I
Right.
thought with that wort, that would actually be a nice compliment. So that's what went in there.
Man, buckwheat is it's both so fun and also just so powerful and dangerous in a way, because it's like it can overpower and kill a brew, or it can just transform it into this own little unique character, and I love that.
Very true. Yeah, it is definitely a funky kind of a honey. The eastern buckwheat, especially,
Hmm.
has a lot more of that barnyardy, horse blanket, wet hay. Sometimes you get leather notes, which I personally really like,
Uh-huh.
especially like in wine. I love getting leather notes in some of the big reds. But I think a little of that honey goes a long way. So I like it as a blending opportunity.
Hmm.
And in fact, there are three of us doing a collab mead right now. So I love doing collabs. I always have a barrel project going. And
Okay.
as you know, in my area, there's a lot of very strong mead makers.
Yes, there are.
So
Yep.
I have a lot of very good mead makers to choose from. And so I usually have two other mead makers working on a barrel project with me. And I have Adam Bystrom
Okay.
and Josh Holbrook
Oh
on this
man.
project right now. So I feel like even if I totally screw up, I've got two wonderful hands involved in
Hmm.
this project that
Yeah.
I can't go wrong.
You got like titans of the industry right there. Those guys are killers. I mean,
Right, right. Two
that's
mead
awesome.
makers of the year. They both know what they're doing, and so we actually are all just finishing a second batch, which will go into this barrel,
Hmm.
and it does have some Eastern buckwheat in it.
Yeah. Let's go
So
backwards to you're talking about about aging, and
yeah,
fermentation time. So let's say our mead takes 3 weeks to ferment out. So this is where people kind of get kind of iffy on the drinkability of it. Let's say it like
mhm.
that. I feel like a mead can definitely be drank at any point, and obviously it's really dependent. Like there's a million and a half factors of like what's going on with it that might make it take longer to be its best. But I agree that you should be able to, if you've had a good process, drink your mead way earlier than the conventional, reading the books or the Googling standards. I started off, making mead, and it was like, everything you made had to be a year old before you even like looked at it for more than 5 seconds. And I was like, holy cow, like this is insane. And I'm definitely swung to the other side now, because I have a bunch of brews that I'm setting on that are really young, but they're still good. And I think it's so much more fun when you don't necessarily have to wait a year to drink that thing.
Sure. So let's talk about the difference between hitting peak and being enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
And then the flip side to all of that is this whole, and I'm going to blame the internet, but this whole idea that, like you said, oh, you got to wait at least a year for it to be any good at all, or 2 years in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm.
You see people touting, right? So to me, if you have to wait that long, if you choose to wait that long, that's a different thing.
Right.
But if you have to wait that long for it to be good,
mm-hmm.
then you did something wrong.
Yeah.
Plain and simple.
Yeah.
If you got all this rocket fuel and infusely nail polish character in your mead, and you had to let it age for 2 years for that to soften, that is a process flaw.
Mm-hmm.
There is absolutely no reason to do that today with the tools that we have available to us.
Yeah. I agree. It's really funny you're saying all this stuff, because I shot a video a little bit a couple weeks ago that's all about this kind of idea, and I tried to be as infographic as possible with it, talking about how long you should age mead. And I kind of think of it like a bell curve. There's a point where it's pretty young, and then it will hit its peak, as you talk about, but there is a whole point where it's really good when it's up here.
And how wide is the top of the bell, right? Is it a mountain peak, or is it a gentle swale?
Right.
Because that makes a big difference.
Right. And the way I was trying to talk about it was like, let's say you're making a 5%er mead, it's, that bell curve is going to probably be a little bit shorter, and I do think there's an end. Obviously bell curve comes to an end at some point, and there is a point where that brew is not as good and is probably going the other direction. And I think that's something that we obviously don't want to ever think about, because we're like, we've put so much money and time and effort into this thing that how could it possibly go bad? But the truth is, like, there is a point where it's probably not going to be as good, or something finally deteriorates and ages,
or it's going to be very different from where it was, at least, which is maybe not the same as saying it's bad. I have a friend, I think you had him on one of your episodes, Al Boyce. Mm-hmm. He made an anniversary mead. I believe it's 21 years old now. And so once a year, he cracks a bottle. And just recently did that. And I had some with him and his wife a little while back, I think last year. And I know he doesn't stabilize any of his meads typically.
Okay.
Which works for him, because the kind of mead he makes, they're pretty high ABV and usually have a lot of sugar, and they age better, and they don't necessarily have to be stabilized. And I think this was one of those types of meads. But now it's got a little sparkle to it.
Oh, weird.
Because even though you don't really need to stabilize a mead like that, there's still process that's going on, biological changes, chemical changes. And over time, it has continued to just ferment slightly, even if there's just, 150 yeast cells that are viable that survived for all this time. And there may be more, who knows? I don't know what the count is. But there's just enough to do something, and it tastes fine, but I'm sure it doesn't taste like it did 15 years ago.
I've got I've got a similar project I'm excited about. It's a one I'm aging for 25 years. And so I made enough bottles to get me through 25 years, obviously. I'm about to open, actually, in about 2 weeks' time, the second bottle of it. And so obviously it's pretty young. Same idea. It's pretty high sugar, and it's high ABV to hopefully age for a long time. But I am super curious to see, like you're saying, how it does. And mine is stabilized, so I'm hopeful that there's not any any chaos or anything that happens over time. If there is, we'll deal with it. Obviously, that's just part of the process. But
Right.
it is so fun to like see something grow and change. And you do have to, when you want to age a mead for that long, you do have to think about it and adjust things to be able to age long term.
Right.
So
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think your ingredient choices, how big you make it, and by that I mean your starting gravity, finishing gravity, and then the amount of acid and tannin that you want to have in the mead. I think if you take a cue from the wine world, the wines that age best for a long time tend to have a lot of tannin,
mm-hmm.
and the tannin slowly changes and fades away a little, but it's still there. It just, it changes. But those tannins really provide some longevity to the wine. The wine, you don't age a Riesling for 25 years.
Yeah.
No tannin.
Right.
But, a big cab or a left bank or a right bank wine, if it's from the right place and it has the right content, it can age for a lot longer than that and be quite good.
Yeah.
So those are things you want to consider for sure if you're going to put something away. But again, that goes back to do I have to do this, or is it a choice?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. So if you do things right, even a big mead should be drinkable in 2 months.
I 100% agree. I'm fermenting something right now that I'm sending to some competitions, and I'm kind of a little nervous because it's the first time I'll have pushed it as quick as I have. And, I'm very curious to see. It'll only be like 2 months old by the time I send it off. And I normally let it, it's like 3 months is my normal like starting point of where it is. But it's that kind of rush of like, can I do this? And I'm hopeful that it does well, and that if it doesn't, then obviously it's, I've got to continue working my process with stuff. But that the idea that you have to age things for so long really deterred me from mead making for a little while. And it's just like nobody wants to watch paint dry. That's kind of what you're doing.
I agree.
When you're sitting for a year.
Yeah, I do agree. And I think people who kind of fall for that internet wisdom, if you will, it is a deterrent.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the educational process to see if we can teach people that it isn't necessary. Right. And you can make great product, even big alcoholic sweet meads, and have them servable in 2 or 3 months and be very happy with them.
Right.
And that's a game changer if you are living in the world of, well, I got to put it aside for 2 years before it's any good at all.
Right. I recently I had somebody, I made a pina colada mead recipe, and I started to use coconut water in it. And my experience with that coconut water was not good. I had some not so great reactions with it. It wasn't like, I was sick by it or like allergic, but it was like, this is just not a great thing to throw into the brew. It was adding some weird flavors. And so I posted this video, and I ended up finding alternative coconut methods and stuff like that. Well, somebody came through and really kind of lambasted me for saying no to coconut water. And they were like, you have to age it for at least 9 months before it's any good. And my response to it was like, while that might be true, I don't know that I want to make a recipe that I, like, at bare bones have to age 9 months before I can drink it. Like, I feel like there's got to be a better way to get to that flavor profile.
I don't know what coconut water tastes like. I've never had like canned coconut water. I've only had like coconut milk out of a coconut. And the stuff that I always had, because when I was young, we'd go to the supermarket and buy one,
right,
crack it open and drink it, and it was always sour.
Yeah.
I don't think it's supposed to be.
I don't think so either.
So that's my experience with coconut water.
Right. It's kind of, it's got electrolytes, and it's got some like a little bit of saltiness to it, because that's kind of its the kind of vibe. And so it's a whole different animal. But I love getting the challenge of that, because now I'm doing something with coconut water. I'm kind of putting that to the test, and I'm going to see if that 9-month thing is true. And, I kind of hope that it is, because I don't want to take away a ingredient for somebody to use in their brewing, especially if it's good. But the whole idea that even using a set of ingredients that you have to wait a certain amount of time before you can enjoy it just seems like such a deterrent. And I'm hopeful that we can find alternatives for those things when we run into them so that people can try stuff earlier. So
Sure.
it's a
There
challenge.
usually are alternatives if
Right.
you can figure out what they are.
Yeah.
I
Coconut's
mean,
a hard
I've
one.
used toasted coconut several times in mead, and
Yeah.
it's kind of messy to work with,
Yeah.
but if you do it right, it really adds a lot of cool character if you have the right ingredient combo.
Yeah, and that's what I use. So in that recipe specifically, I use toasted coconut chips, and I kind of came back and with the pina colada side, it's hard to get a real good coconut essence there. So I ended up using like Malibu rum to try and get
Oh,
some rum and Malibu, that coconut. So it cheated a little bit, but there are definitely interesting ways to go about getting those various ingredients.
mhm.
So I challenge anybody listening to, like, if you have an ingredient you are challenged by, to try it in multiple different ways. Don't just settle for, well, the coconut water didn't work for me. Maybe go buy some chips, maybe buy toasted coconut, maybe buy blah blah blah. There's lots of different ways to make a recipe work for you.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, another kind of interesting thing if you're looking for alternatives. So raspberry is a very popular ingredient in mead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Raspberry leaves.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they make raspberry tea is made with raspberry leaves, not raspberries.
Interesting. Huh. I never knew that.
I haven't actually used them myself. I have three kinds of raspberries in the garden, and
Uh-huh.
so that is one of those things I want to try at some point. And I don't know if I'm going to do a side by side with the fruit versus the leaves, but I think it'd be kind of fun to try and just see
Yeah.
see what happens,
Well, if you don't, I'll do that. That sounds like a fun test, honestly.
Yeah, I
Just to
mean,
see.
maybe they're totally different. I
Right.
don't really know, but if you go buy an herbal tea that they say it's raspberry, it probably has raspberry leaves in it.
Right. Well, so it's kind of like maple syrup. So I'm sure you know this, but a lot of people talk about, if you're making an Acer Glen, you could of course use maple syrup and all those things. A lot of people say the cheat code to it is actually fenugreek seeds, and using,
Yeah,
like, kind of toasting them. And I've had some experience with that where they actually have a lot of maple profile, and they're like not really anywhere near the maple syrup realm. Now, I don't know if I'm going to go and totally make an Acer Glen with fenugreek seeds and no maple syrup.
I wouldn't.
Right, right.
I've done it.
Oh, really? Did not go so well?
Yeah. So at the Iron Bee a few years ago, in fact, I think the one you attended,
Yes.
that
Yep.
was their featured
Mm-hmm.
secret ingredient. And I think I made the mistake of just going straight up fenugreek. Some of the other
Oh.
guys added other things to it to help balance. And mine tasted like very artificial maple syrupy, like
Okay.
Mrs. Butterworth's kind of syrup, right?
Oh.
Yeah, big time. And I still have two bottles of it because I didn't know what to do with it. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just hang on to them and I could blend it into something just a little bit. But I
Yeah.
never have it. They're just sitting there and they're now 4 years old or whatever,
I've
waiting for
got
somebody to come along and try them.
Man, so mine, you're gonna laugh because mine was that was my first competition to ever enter, and I had this silly idea. I only entered that portion of it. I did fenugreek, pear, and I had never used fenugreek before, so I didn't know what was going on with it. And cilantro. For some reason, my
Oh,
my brain was like, let's throw some cilantro in this thing. I have no idea what I was thinking. It was not good. I mean, to say the least.
that does not sound like a very appealing combination to me. I don't know what you were thinking either.
I still have some
I
bottles
think
of
you
that
you
too.
started on the right path,
Yeah.
but the addition of that cilantro, I think pear and fenugreek, that kind of makes sense,
Right.
right? Yeah. So I don't know. There's you can do weird things in the mead world, that is for sure.
Yeah. So let's talk
But
about
yeah,
your
I
rest.
had never worked with fenugreek. I had never even actually heard of it before that competition.
Yeah.
And I think kind of like you've intimated, I really like challenges. My little mead group does that kind of stuff all the time. It's like,
Uh-huh.
okay, everybody make a rhubarb mead, and we'll
Mm.
all send it to the Michigan Mead Cup, and whoever gets the highest score wins. Doesn't matter if you met all.
Yeah.
And so
Just
one year we flooded them with rhubarb meads. There were like 5 or
oh,
6 of us. And
that's
so I'm
fun.
sure they were sitting there wondering, what the heck is going on? Why do we have 5 rhubarb meads this year? That's really weird, you know?
Yeah. That's
So we do
that's I
stuff.
would love to do that. That seems like a lot of fun to me to be able to just like I love that. That makes me want to go do that with some friends too. I want
Well,
to
that
talk
would be
about
a good thing to do on the Discord server and just say, okay, here's a
yeah.
challenge.
Yeah.
And everybody, you just, this is the ingredient. And you all send them to Valkyries Horn, Major Cup, whatever, right? And see who gets the highest score.
Now that we got your permission, get ready. It's coming.
Oh, we
2024.
can
You're gonna
handle it.
have
Trust me.
we'll have a bunch of cilantro and fenugreek meads. Don't
Oh,
worry.
there.
Send it your way.
Oh, I don't want to judge
Get it.
that one.
Get excited. Let's talk about your recipe development because you're 5 years in and you've done a ton of beer. Obviously, mead I feel like is different in the recipe developing and trying to mix match profiles. When you are starting with, let's say, a base fruit and you want to expound on it, how are you adjusting and making your recipes work? Are you trying things from experience? Are you doing what I did and just kind of Hail Mary, throw some things in and let it go?
I would say that I'm a very intentional brewer. Um, it's rare for me to just chuck something in there to see what happens.
Uh-huh.
So I plan. It is in my nature. And
Uh-huh.
so I look for, so right now I have a list of unexecuted mead that's probably about 250 deep.
Oh.
And when I have an idea or when I run into a concept, or even if I'm reading a magazine and there's a cocktail advertisement and I see some combo in there that to me sounds really appealing, I jot down a note, and then that would be one that I'd want to make at some point. So I build around those concepts.
Okay. Man, 250. So that's your when you're when you have an idea, do you ever have to go back and go, "Have I had this idea before?"
No, I keep really good notes. So
Okay.
if I ever wondered if I had done it, all I have to do is look in my list of all the meads that I've made, and
Okay.
I'm coming up on batch 150 here.
Oh, man. So do you use like a Google sheet or you hand notes and
I use a spreadsheet that I built that has all
okay.
my formulas and everything else all built into it.
Oh, cool. I use a Google sheet because I'm the same way. I'm like, I want to remember what I've done and keep track of everything. And it's been a lifesaver. Anyone who's listening, that is a good way to like not only remember what you've done, but like go backwards and say, what was that recipe that I did?
Oh,
I feel like
absolutely. I mean, I start with, so you were asking about recipe formulation. So I start with a concept or an idea of some ingredient choice that I want to work with, right?
uh-huh.
And then I decide for that combo what type of a mead that I want to make. And so mostly I make session style meads or very close to it. My top end is typically about 12%. Although I do make a few big ones, like I mentioned before, for
Uh-huh.
special projects. But you can only drink a little bit of that stuff. And that's why I don't make it very often, because those meads have a tendency now to sit around for 4 or 5 years waiting for somebody to come along and have another ounce of it, you know?
Right, right.
So I approach it more like beer.
Mm-hmm.
I make, 5 to 7% mead typically, with the occasional 10 or 12% wine style mead.
Okay.
And so I look for ingredients that'll work in that space, and then I build around that. So I choose my honey based on my ingredient choices, and I have a rather huge honey library.
Yeah.
Fortunately, my wife is not bothered by that, because
Yeah.
it's gotten out of proportion. We'll
I feel
say.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how many pounds of honey I have, but I'm sure it's over 1,500.
Man.
Yeah,
How are
just
you like are you doing like 10-pound pouches or are you getting
no.
it in small amounts? Are you getting 60 pounds?
I get 60 pounds at a time,
All
typically.
right.
Yeah.
Man.
So
What are
yeah.
some obviously you have some great honey sources. So for some people who are listening who are like, hey, oh my gosh, I want to have 1,500 pounds of honey. What are some sources that you like to go to get your honey in bulk, or
Well,
maybe
do keep
even
in
just
mind
other?
it does require that you have a budget that allows it. because
Yes.
buying a bucket of meadow foam is not a cheap enterprise.
Nope. Nope.
No.
Nope. Nope.
So Wayne Gibbons is one of my favorite honey vendors,
Hmm.
and he has great honey. I mean, he produces some of absolutely the best sweet yellow clover you're ever going to have in your life.
Okay.
The 2019 crop in particular was absolutely phenomenal. And so I have like 3 buckets of that still in storage, because it was just, once I had it, it's like, oh, I got to have more of this, because
Got to get more.
he's going to run out, you know. And they're looking for, it's a biennial crop. So they're looking for another good year when the weather and the crop cycle lines up. And it really makes a difference. But he's great. And he does sell other honey. So just as a helpful hint, I'm also on the AMMA Home Governing Committee, the American Mead Makers Association. And I actually am now running the member deal program for them.
Okay.
So every single month of the year, we have a different honey vendor that comes in and offers a discount to the membership. And that includes pros.
Okay. Wow.
So, you can go to Walker Honey Farm in December. They're typically on in December, and buy whatever they have to sale for sale at that time at a 10 or 15% discount.
Wow.
And
that's pretty good.
Be Seasonal is another good one. They have a wide range of South American honey, and it's quite good quality, and it's very reasonably priced. And so I have buckets and buckets of their honey.
Yeah.
That I like a lot. They have some really neat varietals. Eucalyptus is a new favorite for me. It's very cool honey.
Interesting. So
yeah.
Specifically on eucalyptus, what are some things that you've used it in that you've liked? Because it's very unique.
Yeah, so it's got really big caramel and toffee notes. Some people report like the sort of minty eucalyptusy flavor. I don't get that at all.
That's what I've gotten before, but that's not to say that it is there. It just could be my perception.
Yeah, I don't know. It might depend on where it came from and what type of eucalyptus tree, because there's a whole bunch of different varieties, and where it's sourced in Brazil might make a huge difference in that. I really don't know. But the stuff that I've gotten from Be Seasonal has been more caramel and toffee, and so actually it's in our current barrel project right now.
Okay. Yeah.
That's one of the honeys that we blended in, and I think it's a really neat honey. There's all kinds of stuff I would use that in. As far as other sources, we have Z Specialties, which has a huge range of honey. They are kind of spendy, but really good quality.
Yeah.
And then we've got some other vendors that have come on. We actually have for the AMMA, it's coming up in like July or August maybe. We have a new vendor that sells all coffee blossom honey from Guatemala.
Man.
And it's from 3 individual farmers that have hives located where it's almost 100% terroir for coffee.
That's awesome.
There's other stuff I'm sure mixed in, but it's a high percentage. And the vendor sent me a little 3 sampler, 1 ounce taster jars. And so I tasted through those, and all 3 of them are fantastic. The best coffee blossom I've ever had. And so they're coming on the AMMA deal here sometime this year. I can't say exactly when. But so for people who are, why would I join the AMMA? That would be the sole reason you need to justify, because your membership's only $20. So if you buy a bucket, or if you buy 30 pounds of honey or 20 pounds of honey, you probably just paid for your membership and you got a good honey to boot. So that's a good reason. Otherwise, there's some locals. We have Jonathan Gardner in Minnesota, in southwestern Minnesota. He produces some really nice honey. So he's also one of our AMMA vendors. And I actually am keeping bees now as well. I'm in
Oh,
my
really?
third year, and they've done, or fourth year now. They've done rather well. Mine didn't survive the winter this year. We had a really rough winter,
Mm,
and so they didn't make it. But I've got a lot of my own honey, which is heavily basswood oriented,
okay. Yeah.
because I
Interesting.
live on a little like a slope ridge, and it's just loaded with gigantic basswood trees, like 50 feet tall kind of trees. And
That's pretty cool, though.
when they bloom, I mean, it's like heaven outside, and the bees really like it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to make sure and put that below to the AMA information. If you are listening to this, that is a great way. One, it's a cool community. It is just a great thing to be a part of, but also, like you're saying, you can get some good deals on honey. And I think everybody's in search of that really good deal on honey, especially nowadays, because it is so expensive, and where you can find any small savings, uh, it'll help you out. So if you have a
I think
significant other
quality
too,
is important as well, and all
yeah.
of these vendors are vetted, so
Hmm.
they all produce very good quality raw honey. They don't do heating, they don't do filtering, none of that stuff. It's not grocery store honey.
Yeah.
Sean Darrell Harris is also one of the vendors that we feature. Actually, he's the featured vendor right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's got a deal right now. You can get 20 pounds, I think, for $100, and then he includes 2 ounces of Tahitian vanilla.
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
His honey is awesome too. I've used tons of his honey, and I mean, it is high quality, very, very good. And he's a wonderful guy. I mean, he's so quick on delivery, but also just really nice talking to him.
yeah, I agree, and he is quick on delivery. I ordered some just recently, and I think it was here in 3 days. I was
It's
a little
crazy.
surprised. So
Yeah.
yeah, uh, that's a good way to get some good honey. I mean, but seek out locals too.
Yeah.
There's lots of local beekeepers, and if you buy in a decent quantity, you can get a pretty good price. I
Yeah.
mean, don't expect to get a good deal on 1 pound of honey that they would be able to sell at the farmers market. They're going to sell that for, $15. They're not
Right.
going to sell it to you for four.
Right. Yeah,
But
I really wanted to a couple years ago. I went to my farmers market and I was looking for somebody, to buy some local honey from. And the only person I could find, I was like, all right, I want to buy, 60 pounds. And they looked at me kind of funny at first. And I was like, well,
why?
yeah, exactly. And then they said something, it was just a wildflower or whatever. And they said $450. And I was like, I can't do it. It's for a wildflower honey. That's not that it's not good enough, but if I'm going to spend that kind of money, I want to get something really interesting. I could almost get a bucket of meadow foam for maybe close to that at that point.
Yeah, for sure you could.
Yeah.
Even today,
Yeah.
for $450, you can buy a whole bucket of metal foam, and it'll be top notch.
Right.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that for a generic kind of local wildflower. Even
Right.
if it's really interesting, I would, because that's premium pricing there for sure.
Hmm. I
Um,
definitely will go back and probably to ask that same person now and kind of see, but definitely support local if you can.
mhm.
Also, be willing to look online because, like you're saying, there's so many good sources and so many good beekeepers out there that are sitting on awesome honey, quality honey. That's important. So,
Yeah.
let's.
Oh, so there's actually a new guy in town, World Honey Exchange.
Hmm.
So he's also one of the AMMA vendors, and I ran into him at MeadCon last year, and so that's why I brought him on. And he sells honey from Africa, and he had some from India, which is all gone, some from Indonesia, which is all gone, and I think he had a little bit of honey from Brazil as well. Some really interesting honey.
Wow.
Um, and he's actually one of the sponsors for Valkyries Horn this year. So we are
Okay.
doing Josh Holbrook and I are doing 3 meads with his honey that we are going to do as our commemorative mead that we give to all of our attendees.
Oh, that's fun. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Huh.
So they'll be out of Africa, all this stuff.
That is so cool. I want to
Yeah.
talk about Valkyries Horn because we haven't really. I mean, people might know this or might not know this about you, but you are one of the, if not the, front runner of Valkyries Horn. And
Yeah, I'm the primary organizer for it. Yep. I do
so
most of the heavy lifting.
tell us all about it. So some people will know, what is Valkyrie's Horn? for those people who don't know?
Well, it's kind of like what you guys are doing, Mead Stampede, right? I mean, same basic idea. It's a mead competition run by mead enthusiasts, and pretty much all the people who run it are here local,
Hmm.
which only makes sense, right? You need proximity to where you're going to have it.
Right.
But yeah, we're really interested in trying to do the highest quality job we can with our judging and our process so that people have an incentive and a reason to come in and participate.
Right.
So for anybody who enters, we want them to have high quality feedback. We don't do short form feedback, no check boxes, none of that stuff.
Hmm.
So we want people to write out sensory impressions. We don't
Yeah.
want one word impressions.
Yeah.
It's not really helpful to the entrant.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
it is about the entrant. So that's what we're focused on. And then for people who volunteer, we try to make sure that we do as much as possible for them to basically repay them for being there. It's not a job for you to be there. It's fun to be there.
Hmm. Hmm.
So when you show up, we're not just going to put you to work. We're going to do some fun things for you.
I love
So
that.
that's why we do the commemorative mead. You know, we make one or two of those every year. Everybody who comes and helps out gets to go home with those, and
That's
they're all
cool.
different. Last year, Adam Bystrom for our educational component did uh, an orange blossom, 3 different orange blossoms. So I sourced orange blossom from Florida, from Mexico, and from California. And he
Hmm.
made the identical recipe from all 3 of those different honeys, and then we bottled it and put them all side by side for a side by side tasting for all of the entrants. I mean, for all of
Oh,
the attendees.
right. Right.
So you get an opportunity to, see what the terroir difference is for all those honeys using the exact same process.
That is super cool. I love that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of stuff that only makes your judges better. Is diving deeper. And I feel like as mead makers, obviously we enjoy drinking our products or trying other things, but more importantly, we're all seeking to like develop our palate, and the only way to do it is to stretch yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
like those little side by sides are just like so perfect for that because it's easy to assume orange blossom tastes like this, and then you
Right.
just kind of implant that in your brain, and you never really stretch it and go, well, maybe it's different in Florida than it is California until you put them side by side. And then one day you try a different orange blossom mead and you go, oh, that's like the Florida one I had that one time.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah,
just so
and they
fun.
are different. They're quite different.
Yeah.
I personally found that at least the orange blossom I've had from Florida has been kind of earthy,
Mm.
and the Mexican orange blossom was like way brighter and more floral, and the California orange blossom, which came from Z Specialties, was more citrusy. More like
Mm.
when people say orange blossom is citrusy,
Yeah.
that would be the one I would point at. But most of the time, it's not citrusy.
Uh-huh.
And very interesting to see them all side by side. And as
Yeah.
you say, it makes you a better judge if you're going to be a judge. And even if you're not a judge, it makes you a better mead maker because you understand
Hmm.
the differences between the sources.
Yeah. One of my favorite things that doing the most and I end up doing every once in a while is this series called Palate Expanders, and we bring mystery bottles of mead to each other. We don't tell each other what we've brought, and we taste them. And
Mm-hmm.
it's sometimes it's really silly because we'll be totally off base. Like we'll just
Oh yeah.
be totally in another world, or we'll be right on it. And both are just really interesting circumstances. But when you do nail something without knowing what it is such a cool moment to go, holy cow, my palate is actually, I was able to pick up those peppercorns, even
Mm-hmm.
though he only dropped 2 of them in. It's like,
Yeah.
so stuff like that is really fun. And it's challenging though. And it's kind of scary because I feel like um, nobody wants I don't feel like this, I know this, nobody wants to be wrong, nobody wants to just be totally off base with your
I'm wrong
guesses.
all the time.
Yeah.
It's something you need to not be afraid of. I mean, don't go out of your way to be wrong, but it happens.
Right.
And doing stuff blind, sometimes it's a language barrier as much as anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, the reason they put descriptors on the back of a wine bottle is because when you read those and you taste it, of course that's what you detect. right?
Right.
You have been
Yep.
led down that path.
Yep.
And so developing the experience and the familiarity with the aromas and with the flavors
Hmm.
takes a lot of practice to really like lay them down in your brain so that they are instantly recalled.
Yep.
And unless you do it a lot, it's difficult, and
Hmm.
you're going to get it wrong until somebody says the word
Yes. Yeah.
peppercorns and you're like,
Yep.
oh, that's it.
Yeah. And you finally start associating those things. Like the back of that wine bottle is it is good. Like let's say you do taste that bottle of wine and you do it blind and then you look at the label and you go, "Oh yeah, I did taste that." Like I feel like that's where those connecting points are. It's also not bad, I'll say, to some people are going to learn by reading that label and drinking some and going, "Oh, I do get this
Mhm.
specific flavor." And you can start to kind of correlate that for the future. There's just so many ways to develop your palate, and like we're saying, we are that's training. When
Mhm.
you're justifying buying a bottle of mead, it's not only just for enjoying, you're kind of training your palate, you can.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So a couple other things that I think it was 2 years ago, we did a traditional tasting for
Hmm.
Valkyries Horn. That was fantastic.
I remember seeing that.
And yeah, we are going to rotate that every 3 years. So next
Okay.
year that'll be on the docket again. For that one, I believe we had 65
Oh my
distinct
gosh.
varietal honeys that were tasted as mead at that competition. And I
That's
think at the next
crazy.
one, it'll easily be 100 and
Wow.
probably more.
Man.
Great reason to be there and help out because you'll never get another opportunity to taste that many traditional meads. And of course, there are lots of repeats, right? People
Right.
bring stuff in, which is also interesting because sometimes you can, you know, taste that oddball sourwood or whatever
Hmm.
and taste three of them,
Yep.
and they're all either really similar or maybe they're a little different,
Yeah.
and that's very useful too.
So I'm gonna switch gears on you a little bit because I told you about my embarrassing mead combination of pear, fenugreek, and cilantro. I gotta know, in your experience now, 5 years deep of making mead, what's something you've made that you thought would go well and just maybe did not hit the mark? Or has there been something?
Watermelon.
Yeah. How'd you try to do your watermelon though?
uh so what did I do? I made a watermelon mead with, I think, orange blossom honey. I'd have to go back and look at my notes to be certain about that. And honestly, the first couple of weeks after it was finished with fermentation, it was pretty decent.
Uh-huh.
I could taste the watermelon; it was fine. And then I back sweetened it with meadow foam because it was too dry.
Mm.
And I thought that the toasted marshmallow character of meadow foam would go really nicely with the watermelon. And again, initially it was fine,
Yeah.
but there is something about melon that
Mm-hmm.
just goes bad after it sits for a while when it's been fermented. It
Yeah.
becomes like wet compost. It's not pleasant,
Yeah.
and I had to dump it out. It's one of the
Oh
very
no.
few batches that I've had to dump. I've been fortunate that because I am a pretty intentional brewer, I don't make a lot of like bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I might make things that don't always work perfectly, but they're usually fairly decent and people
Right.
like them enough to be able to drink them. I mean, they're
Yeah.
not technically flawed, which is also very helpful.
Yeah.
But that one, I wouldn't serve that to anybody.
Not to your worst enemy. Not even.
No, no. I mean, I've had a couple of meads, which I imagine if you make enough mead, everybody's going to have this happen, no matter. And because I have a lot of things going on, like I've got 11 5-gallon batches underway right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy to lose track of one. And if it's sitting in a back corner, it might sit there for months before I come back to it. So it's possible you could end up with an oxidized mead for one.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been passing around a little trick that I learned a few years ago, which really helps with this. Take a little vegetable oil and put just enough into your airlock that it coats the surface
Oh.
and it
Okay.
won't evaporate.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I
Yeah.
never thought
So
about that.
for everybody out there, this
Yeah.
is my little gift to you. If you're going to leave things sit for a while, that's an old plumber's trick, actually. If you're going to
Yeah.
abandon a house for 6 months, you put a little oil in the trap,
Yeah.
and it keeps it from going dry and having sewer gas in the house.
Huh.
So it does work pretty well. Still needs a little attention now and then, but you don't have to go check on it every couple of weeks.
Right.
But the other one is occasionally you'll get a pellicle forming. Everybody's going to have it happen. You know, there's bacteria in the air, and if you don't pay attention and get to it right away, you're going to have one. But in some cases, they're salvageable.
Yeah. Yep. I've had that, and it's scary. The first time you get it, you're like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on? Am I? It's mold. I gotta dump it." And I remember I dumped my very first one. It was on a strawberry mead, and I just, I didn't pay attention, left it in the bucket for a little while, and it formed. And I opened that thing up, and I was like, "This is my first time experiencing it," so I was terrified. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this. It's all bad." And I went and dumped it. A year later, I'm like, "Oh, that's what that was." Like,
Yeah.
I probably could have, maybe salvaged it, maybe not.
Yeah, maybe. It
still
depends on what's
iffy.
in it. Like
Yeah.
I've done that with a sizer. There's something about that, the way the pellicle forms and the flavor that adds that's actually not bad in a sizer if it's not too prominent.
Yeah.
And that's the key, right? How strong is it?
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't have mold, you're okay,
right.
basically. And if you like sours, then let her roll.
It's a way to sour, yeah.
I've made sour beer on purpose. I can't drink much of it anymore because it doesn't like me very much, but I enjoy it. And I've made a few, and I've probably had more beer go sour on me than definitely more beer go sour on me than mead, because beer is a lot more susceptible to that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, if anyone doesn't know what we're talking about, you can look up a pellicle, and I recommend you do that when you are brewing. If you are unaware what this is, because you'll do what I did and you'll freak out and you'll toss it immediately, and it might not be a bad situation. Now it could be. Don't just save something just because. I know it's hard with mead making. We want to save it because we're like, we spent however much money making it, dumping it is such a waste of money, and then maybe I should just scoop off the mold. If something's going moldy, if something looks really sketchy, maybe just call it a loss, chalk it up for what it is, and learn from that experience. But there's a point where salvaging something is not wise.
Absolutely. I mean, if it gets brown fuzzy or green fuzzy on it, that's gotta go. Gotta go. But if you just get a thin film or a pellicle, you might be able to rack under it. You might be able to save it, but don't be married to the idea.
Yeah.
Be ready to let it go if it's not good. But if you can rack under it and the flavor's not too strong and it might be complemented by something else, make sure you stabilize it so you can stop the process. And then continue on. See what happens.
That's something that you only understand after you've experienced it. And I feel like, a lot of people, we hear about that, and you're like, that'll never happen to me. And
oh yeah.
and then there you go. Next batch. Here we are. Right. Here's the problem.
Sure. Yeah, that'll never happen.
So you said you have 11 5-gallon batches going. I gotta ask, where's this mead going to? Are you sending to competitions yourself? Are you sharing with your buddies, or
competition probably?
Okay.
Yeah, so I didn't do very many competitions last year. This year I'm doing all of the AMMA circuit ones.
Sweet. Yeah.
And there's only one that's happened so far this year, and I wish we could fix this, but it's not up to us. It's when the comps happen, and they're all backloaded. They're all between September and November. Right. So there's 4 or 5 more that are on the circuit that will all take place within a month and a half or so of each other, and which means for the mead makers, there's no opportunity for any kind of corrections.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. So,
yeah. And that's an interesting fact too, because let's say there is a correction you have to make on that mead. Some people, I'd be curious to hear if some people are going to go in and open a bottle and add that little bit of acid blend or do something to a bottle specifically, or
I
if
do.
they'll just start over. Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely, I do. I don't always,
Right.
but if I get feedback from enough people that I trust, who say, "Oh, it needs oak, or it needs a little more acid, or it needs more tannin to balance," I'll trial it with a
Yeah.
fresh bottle, and if then I agree, then I will go back and add those to the bottles that are going to the comps.
Yeah.
I
That's
actually am
interesting.
finishing up a couple of changes to some entries for national second round for the American homebrewers.
Sweet. That's fun. I say this. I had the other day. I opened up a bottle. I was shooting like the finale of something I'd made, and I realized as I was drinking the final product that I'd already bottled, I was like, this really could have used like just a pinch of citric acid, like just a little bit. And I even like
Sure.
got a glass, and just a little test. It's like, dang it. But I was like, I'm not gonna go back and open each bottle. I was like, I have passed it. I've
Were
only
they
got like 6
still?
bottles. They were, yeah, they were still.
Okay,
I
so
mean, I
still mead is a lot easier to adjust, right?
right.
Because you have no loss of carbonation that you need to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
Carbonated meads are a little tougher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that can be challenging. I actually have one that I'm adjusting that is carbonated. So what I've done is I gave it a very tiny dose of K-Meta
Mm.
to scavenge oxygen. And then
Okay.
I opened all of the bottles and carefully poured them into a 2-liter soda bottle,
Oh, okay.
made my adjustments in there, and then put a carb cap on it, and I'm recarbonating them.
Interesting. Wow. I've never thought about that. I'd be too terrified to do that. Honestly, I'd be like, oh,
Well,
like,
what do I have to lose? I mean,
yeah,
they made it to the second round, and either I make an adjustment if I want to have a shot at a medal, or I just don't send them. So
right.
I've already paid for it all. I just have to pay for shipping for the next round. So
That's
why
true.
not?
Yeah, that's true. That is so cool though. That second round. So is there 3 rounds for that one? I don't remember.
Two,
2.
two.
All right. So this is
Yeah.
it. Man.
Yeah. So out of my 5 entries, I got 4 that moved on. So
Oh,
I'm pretty happy with that, actually.
that's
I
pretty
was
good.
not
Yeah.
expecting that.
Man, that's so cool.
But there are some people I've talked to who did way better than that.
Yeah,
One guy in our Minnesota group, Steve Fletty, which I'm sure you know that name,
I know Steve Flood.
he
Yep.
sent his entries to Indianapolis and he got 5 first-round golds.
Man.
Yeah, it's like, holy, I don't know. The guy makes great meat. So
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that he did well, but that's crazy good. I mean,
Yeah.
that's crazy good.
So, well, I kind of want to talk about that because obviously you do a lot of judging, and you've done judging in the past, and even being a coordinator. While you might not be in front of the tables doing a lot of tasting, you at least have the experience to say like, hey, this is what I know to say, and I know how to communicate to people. How do people? Well, how do I say this? Getting feedback, especially if you've only submitted to one competition, can be a little bit odd because you are kind of at the whim of 2 people, 3 people, however many have tasted that mead. So how do people who only get feedback from one select person, not to say you don't trust the feedback, but how do you decipher? How do you go through the process of looking at feedback as a new brewer, as a new
Yeah, I mean,
competition person?
that's tough. And to be honest, the best way to build that is to send to more than one
Mm-hmm. Yep.
over time and just see how it works. But so, kind of I guess you could say this is a favorite pet peeve as somebody who's entered a lot of beer competitions and whatnot. I'll get feedback sometimes from judges, and I'm not bashing judges. This is all perception, right? It's
Right.
up to
Right.
them to decide what they perceive, and sometimes it's their experience level.
Right.
I get one judge who says it has low carbonation, the other one says it has high carbonation,
Mm.
and they
Yeah.
both ding it because in one opinion is too high and the other opinion is too low.
Right.
Well, at least one of the two of them is wrong,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
maybe both.
Yeah.
Because it might have been in the middle, right? So a lot of that is training for them and
Mm-hmm.
experience. And so you have to decide how much of it you trust based on what you have done and what you know about the mead, right? So I'm always evaluating what I get back based on my own perception. And I'm a pretty harsh judge of my own thing. I'm probably a lot more harsh on my own than anybody else's.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes if you see a consistent theme, and this would be one of the things that I look for, especially if you're new, if you've only done one competition, you get 2 score sheets back. If you see consistent theme of wording and intensity levels, I would say that's probably fairly trustworthy.
Yeah.
So if they're coming back and saying low honey expression, and they all say that, you can probably trust that that's fairly accurate.
Right.
Now, when we're training judges, one of the things that we want them to do is we want them to tell us what the intensity is, low, medium, high, or anything in between. We want them to hit the key components, right, which is honey and stated ingredients, right? So if you say it's aronia berry, or if it's raspberry, well, it should taste like one of those 2 things, right?
Right.
And then if it's a honey component that's been named as a varietal and it has a particular character like meadow foam, tupelo, sweet yellow clover, one of those fairly or orange blossom, it should have characteristics that are appropriate to that honey. And you would be looking for wording on that score sheet that describes that, right?
Yeah.
So if it's meadow foam, you want to see something like, oh, it's got a light toasted marshmallow note, characteristic of meadow foam. They don't necessarily need to use the word characteristic or even meadow foam, but it should have descriptors that tell you that they detected that type of character.
Yeah.
So if you start to see as an entrant, when this comes back, you start to see consistency among those things, I would say that's probably fairly trustworthy. If they're diametrically opposed, then probably one of them is not experienced. And then I would just disregard that and go to the one that had the best descriptors.
Yep.
And use that advice as my feedback for what can be done. Also, as a new entrant, chances are fairly good that you're not as experienced in the mead making process.
Right.
So the BJCP standard for a score sheet writing is that for every 10 points that you take off of the 50 total, you should have at least one suggestion for improvement in the overall comments.
Okay. Huh.
So people who haven't been through the whole BJCP testing process don't necessarily know that, but that is one of the things you should look for. So, if you get a score below 30, well, that should indicate that there are some process things that you could fix. So, if they made a comment about, well, it's got nail polish and fusel alcohols in the aroma or in the flavor, then a suggestion would be control your temperatures.
Yeah.
Or make sure you add nutrients so that the yeast aren't starved. Things like that. You would expect to see those on the score sheet. And those would be good things for a new mead maker to look for and expect to find. And then take heed, because those are good suggestions to improve your process.
Yeah. And I think it's, as someone who, when I entered my first mead competition, now granted, I feel like my first one, being that pear Fenugreek cilantro was such a silly choice that, my feedback there was more so like, I don't know what you're doing here. You know what I mean? Like, I do remember reading that and going, oh man, I feel like I had something here, and I got a little deterred at first, but in reality, the perception of that mead is by other people is I think, I don't want to say more important than yours. That's not what I mean. Your drinking of the mead should be what you enjoy. You should be making mead for yourself primarily, and then when you give it to other people, I think that's where the, let's say, real feedback comes in. And what I love about competitions is the people who try your stuff don't know who you are. They don't know your name. They don't know anything about you. And so they're tasting things and just giving their feedback. And hopefully, as we've talked about, they're giving feedback that is there to benefit you and not just tear you down, because it's really easy to just rip into stuff, but to actually invest and say, here's what I think you could try different next time.
Right.
That kind of feedback that's unfiltered is like so important for growth.
Yeah, I mean, the blind nature of it, I think, is very helpful to entrants in particular. It also keeps the judges from making inadvertent mistakes based on things that they know, right?
Yeah.
Or bias. And judges have bias, so you cannot get past that. I mean, there's just no way. I entered a coriander blossom honey in a competition, and I had a judge tell me, "Why would you ever make a mead with this kind of honey?" And that pisses me off.
Right,
that's their
wild.
fault.
No.
They should be evaluating based on the character that's declared and the quality of the mead. Now, in the overall, they can talk about drinking pleasure, which then can become somewhat personal. But up to that point, there shouldn't be any of that on the score sheet.
Right.
Just because you made a cilantro and maple syrup mead, right?
Yeah.
Which is an odd combination, and a judge might question why you made that choice. But that should be reserved for the overall comments, and it should be focused on the overall drinking pleasure and quality of the mead.
Mm-hmm.
Was that something I would want to have a full glass of?
Yeah.
Or would I want to dump it out because I didn't enjoy it? Right. Yeah. But everything up to or preceding that should all be about what did they perceive and whether it was appropriate for what was declared.
Yeah.
So that's a lesson for judging, right? And for people who are entering, think about that, because the drinking pleasure does make a difference. And when a judge has a bias against something in particular, and there are some people who have really strong biases. There's a prominent person in this community here who hates sourwood. And so if I'm organizing the competition and I was thinking about putting him on trads,
you're like,
and I see there's a sour trad in there, guess what? He's not judging that category.
Yeah. That's
because he's got a strong bias against it. He has the same bias against buckwheat. So not going to let him judge that, Right. So when you know the biases as an organizer, sometimes you can help to accommodate that a little bit.
Yeah.
But you don't always know that either. Not everybody's public about their biases.
Right. Yeah. That's you've experienced that bias before, and you can now speak on it.
Yeah.
So I want to honor your time. I got one more thing talking about competitions. So we're talking about declaring your ingredients on a mead. So let's say you are making I'm gonna formulate a brew. Let's say I make a blueberry mead and whatever, and I'm adjusting my acid balance with raspberries, but I'm not really making that a prominent character. When I'm submitting said mead, should I declare in my ingredients list that this is a blueberry mead with raspberry if I don't intend that raspberry to be a prominent character, or should I just say a blueberry mead? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Where do we fall with that in your opinion?
I'm going to tell you what everybody else says first, which is, and this part I agree with. If you can't taste it, don't declare it. Plain and simple. As to if you're adding raspberries to a blueberry mead, then that's actually okay because it's still a berry mead, so it's perfectly fine in that category. But where I have a little difficulty, if you make a sizer and you add spices to it, it doesn't belong in the sizer category. Right. It belongs in the fruit and spice category. And that irks me because people do that all the time. And I have lots of very good friends who are frequent competitors who will add stuff that doesn't belong in a category to make the mead more interesting, and it's not really detectable. And of course they can get away with it because the judges don't know. If they can't taste it,
right,
they have to judge it as they perceive it. So in the beer world, that is considered to be totally okay.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because the ingredient list is very simple.
Yeah, it's
It's
true, I guess.
water, grain, and hops. And just because a beer style typically has roasted malt in it doesn't mean you necessarily have to do it that way, right?
Yeah.
In the mead world, though, we have these categories that are very specific to types of fruit or whatever. And
Uh-huh.
so I tend to be personally more of a purist. So if I enter a cider, it's just apples. It doesn't
Yeah.
have other stuff in it.
Yep.
Um, but I've been coached by people I trust that I shouldn't be doing that.
It's interesting.
I should consider, blending other things into it or adding some other ingredients if you can't detect them to make it more interesting.
Yeah.
I actually had a national judge this first round come perilously close to accusing me of cheating by adding spices to a sizer, which
What?
I didn't do. But this particular judge thought there had to be spices because they had never had an apple cider that was that complex.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to detour because you said something that has really piqued me. I love making apple meads and doing those things. And my apple cinnamon's like my favorite thing to make. How do you, without spoiling all of your secrets, how do you add complexity to a sizer?
Skins.
Okay. And are you using different varieties of apples? Or are you going
Absolutely.
one? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I happen to live in a place that has really good apples.
Okay.
And a lot of different varieties. The club does a big buy in the fall, and we usually get a 3-apple blend, which includes Haralson, Honeycrisp, and then some other varietal. Mm-hmm. And then I do my very darndest to source some crabapple.
Okay, yeah.
And usually Dolgo, I think, is the one that's most commonly available. And crabapple can add a lot of interesting spicy and tannin characters to an apple cider that you wouldn't get from your typical apple varietals.
Okay.
People who live in the South think that Granny Smith apples are good apples. They're not good apples.
I don't think.
Neither are Red Delicious. They are like the worst apple ever.
Why are they the pinnacle one too? Why did they?
Oh, because they ship well. They look like a heart and they're bright red.
That's true.
But they have like a thick, tough skin and they're mushy inside and they don't taste like anything. Don't use those to make a cider. I mean, you can make a drinkable one. I'll grant you that, but you're probably not going to win a national competition with it.
Yeah. So for my recipe, I like to use, now looking at the big apple pie chart where it tells you, sweet and tart and stuff, I end up using sweet mostly, but Gala, Honeycrisp, and Pink Lady are my like 3 combo that I use, and they're all in that sweet category.
Yeah.
But they add a lot of complexity, and when I finally started adding various apples in, that's when I noticed my brew, specifically that one, go from like here to here. Now it's suddenly there's interesting factors here.
Try to find some tart apples.
Okay.
And that's going to help you too. Then I'm going to make another suggestion. So I'm fortunate that being in a club, a fairly big club, we have had access to an apple grinder, one of these things with a great big chute, and it just like blows through the apples and they come out like mush. And then I've got a bladder press. But because it's cold in the fall here, you can cold macerate your apples.
Throw it outside.
Right.
Yeah.
And let them macerate on the skins and on the seeds for at least 24 hours, 48 if you can manage it. Then start your fermentation on the fruit.
Okay.
Boy, does that make a difference. Yeah. Like seriously big difference. That's where you start getting complexity and you get tannin pulled in from the seeds and the skins. And it just makes an enormous difference.
Yeah. I need to send you some of my cider. I'd be curious to see what you think, because I have a different process. I don't have a crusher, unfortunately. So I do a lot of apples actually in secondary, post-stabilizing. And I'll just, I'll use my cheapo little cutter and, just kind of chunks them into little pieces. And I'll throw them in. And I'd be curious to see what you think. I'll have to send you some stuff to try, because it'd be kind of fun to get your feedback on that.
Sure. Be happy to do that. I understand that Nathan Stiegman was contacted by you, and we're going to be running a taste test for you guys.
Yeah. Are you going to be part of that? Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you. So I'm really excited for this one, and people can look forward to this. A year ago now, I started a um, giant batch of must, and I got 20 different yeasts, and basically made 20 different traditionals with these 20 different yeasts, and followed the specific nutrients that they needed, high, low, medium,
Hmm.
their temperature ranges. They all fermented at their median temperature range,
Uh-huh.
essentially. I couldn't quite get them to, the exacts. I did what I
Sure.
could. They're all the same age, though, and I'm planning on sending some to y'all, and hopefully you guys can help me do a tasting of them. And you won't know what yeast they are because I just have them as numbers. But the
Right.
goal is, hopefully at the end of this, with between you guys and maybe some other tasters I get around here, for us to kind of create a interesting tasting notes for some of these yeasts.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I'm part of that. And I don't know exactly how many people we have. I think there were like at least half a dozen of us
Okay.
out of
Yeah.
the roughly 10 fairly good mead makers that we have in the group. So
Man, I
you
am
should get a good
stoked.
cross section.
Yeah, I'm so excited because it's I love those kind of tests. They're so fun just to play around, and yeast are so interesting, and seeing what they can do with just the bare bones honey and what kind of flavor profiles they can kind of curate. I feel like is important information because there's still a lot of brewers who are saying all yeast are the same, and you just throw it in, and
No,
and
they're not.
and I just want to grab them by the shoulders and shake them and say, like, come on, like, try some different yeast. Quit using EC1118 for everything you brew, and you'll see something new.
Yeah. I mean, there's some great yeast that are really versatile, and depending on how you handle them, you can make them do things differently,
Yeah,
which is kind of fun. So low temperature, medium temperature, high temperature definitely can make a difference.
yeah.
In fact, if you come up to Valkyries this year, that's another thing we're doing for our educational component.
Okay.
We're doing mesquite honey, all the same, everything the same, except we're doing 3 different Kvike strains, high and low.
Oh, oh, that's fun. I love
So there's
that.
going to be 6 meads to sample from 3 different mead makers that are done in this way.
That's so cool. I've always wondered about that because obviously people say Kvike and you're like, yeah, I fermented at 98, and that's where most people say they are. I'm actually fermenting something right now with a Kvike, and it's at room temp, and I was a little nervous because I was like, oh, I'm not following the
Yeah.
laws of the Kvike strain, and it might be a weird brew. It might turn out to be funky,
Well,
but
it'll probably be fine. It just isn't necessarily going to throw the same flavors that it would at a higher temperature.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
there's nothing going to be wrong with it.
It just
Yeah.
won't be. The yeast are so interesting, and so I'm excited you're going to be a part of that. That's super exciting. Man, I just can't wait. I'm actually planning on sending those. Hopefully this week. That's my goal, was to get it all
The sooner
packaged
the
up. And
better before it gets hot.
yes, yeah, I
Shipping mead when it gets hot is probably not a good plan.
yeah I bought some of those more of those foldable bottle protectors, and
Oh
so that
yeah,
was my
sure.
goal this time, was to try and. I always worry, especially with something like that, shipping 20 bottles, like something's gonna go wrong, and I'm gonna have to. I've only got a few. I only did half gallons of each batch, so I'm like, this has to go well. This
I
has
think
to
your
be.
shipping will be cheaper if you don't ship all 20 at once.
Oh, really? If I just
Yeah.
do, okay,
There's a weight limit and a size limit on the package that there's a
interesting,
break point. I mean, you can still do it, but I
right?
think it's a little cheaper. You might want to split it into 2 packages of 10.
That's good to know.
Um,
I mean, I might
just
look at that because it gets expensive,
shipping is expensive and more expensive these days than it's been ever. So
right?
that's really rough.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep that in mind because I'd like to not spend $100 to ship these things, but I don't know.
um, Here's another little tip. So I think I heard about this from Bill Boyer or Matthew Weed, Mead rather. Um, there's 2 aggregate shippers that use UPS
Uh
and
huh.
USPS. Pirate Ship
Hmm.
was
I have to look it up.
one of them. I forget the other one. And you might check into them because they are actually
Oh,
substantially cheaper because they do bulk pricing with both of those organizations, and then they pass on
interesting.
a portion of that saving to the user.
Yeah, I just looked it up. This is cool. I'm gonna check this out.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
man.
that'll save you a couple of bucks probably as well. And then
Okay.
like if you use Pyrat, they you just take it to a UPS drop off point.
Hmm.
So uh,
Wow.
it's just like you were using UPS, except you're using a discounted rate. So
Hmm.
that'll
You heard
help
it
you
here,
out.
folks. Yeah, whenever you're trying to ship, I'm going to do that now for sure. But if you are someone who's shipping meats to competitions or to friends or wherever you're going, you got an easy way to do it, cheaper way to do
Cheaper
it.
is better.
Cheaper is better, especially with competitions. If you are somebody who is competitive and you're shipping, you've entered the 10 competitions that you're going to do this year, like that's a lot of stuff to do. So cutting corners to try and save some money. Because you're
Yeah.
already, spending money on an entry fee for each bottle or each mead. And so there's just a
Yeah.
lot of logistics there.
And use those little cardboard shippers because they
Hmm.
really work well. They
Yeah.
really, really do. And I have yet to have received a package at Valkyries, for instance, or other competitions where I've been helping. That was in one of those things where it was broken.
Okay. That's
Never.
good. I've always worried, like, I mean, I haven't either. I've never seen one that's been broken, but it's always that I'm going to be the first. I'm going to be the first one to somehow,
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing sometimes what does survive and what doesn't. We had somebody last year who just threw their stuff in a box, didn't wrap any of it,
and it survived.
and it survived.
Wow.
And then somebody had bubble wrap that was like 4 inches in diameter, and those bottles were broken.
I
I mean, go
had
figure.
my Mazer Cup entries last year. It was so tragic. I submitted 4 or 5 things, and you had to send 1 million bottles to Mazer, and so I mean, I wrapped them really well. I was like so careful with it. I got a shipping notification that it was coming back my way, and I was like, "Oh crap, what happened?" I had, I sent 20 bottles. I got 2 back. The rest were shattered. I mean,
Wow.
they got back in a whole separate box. The ones that I had were just soaked, and I don't know if the UPS driver was like doing body slams or what he was doing, but I don't know how he broke that. And so then I luckily had enough bottles to still send, but I was like, I just burned through 8 bottles of some of these
Yeah.
things. And so then, I didn't do as well as I wanted. And so then I was even more mad. I was like, I used 8 bottles on this stinking thing. And so it's,
And Mazer Cup's fairly expensive to enter too. So
yes,
it all adds up. I didn't enter the last couple of years, but I will be this year. So we'll see.
I'm excited. Well, I am absolutely going to be putting all the information for everyone who wants to enter not only Valkyries Horn competition, which is coming up. I believe registration is open now.
No, no.
No, it's opening
Not until
soon.
June.
June, okay. So soon you can enter, and I'm sure it'll fill up. You guys are very popular competition, so get in there early. And if you want to really make sure you have your entries secured, go ahead and pay too. Don't just register your stuff. Go ahead and pay.
Yeah,
that'll save
we
you
do
some heartache.
recommend that because if we hit the limit and you didn't pay, you're out.
Yep,
So.
and it will happen. It will happen. So you can also check out the AMMA, American Mead Maker Association, for not only just some great deals on honey, but also another community to be a part of. And again, Kevin is one of the masterminds of both of those organizations. So I also super nice guy, will literally answer any question. He's in my Discord. I'm sure you answer emails and any phone calls and texts and anybody who contacts you, because I have no doubt that you are not just making mead for yourself, but making mead to help other people too.
Well, as
I
a
appreciate
judge,
that.
I would much prefer to judge good mead
Yeah.
than bad
Yeah.
mead. So I'm very happy to help out where I can.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time, and I really appreciate this. I know people are going to love getting to hear more about mead competitions, but also your experience and getting to know you. And I sure hope that they will go and enter Valkyries Horn this year, because and go, because I don't know if you've been listening, people, but there are some amazing things happening at the actual event. Not just this year, but next year, possible 100 traditional mead tasting experience. Like, if you're saving money for anything in your life, go ahead and start saving money now so you can fly up there and experience that, because you're not going to get that anywhere else.
Yeah, really. Where would you get that? You can't get it at a meadery.
No, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's fun. So
I'm sure if you write down, trying to justify to your wife or significant others, just say this is research, or taxes, doing some research. It all goes to better your mead making experience.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, thank you for your time, and I have no doubt we'll chat again soon, and maybe we'll get to see each other in person again. And
yeah,
I'll
I hope so.
I'll see you next time. So cheers.
Okay, thank you. All right, good night.